All right, BIM 100 crew, let's talk about the final. I know it can feel like you're staring up at a huge mountain of information, but we're going to get you ready. In this explainer, we are going to zero in on the absolute must-know concepts from Lecture 2.
Yeah, of course you are. It's totally normal. You've gone from DNA structure all the way to really complex experiments, and that is a ton of material. But look, don't worry. We're not going to try to relearn everything.
You know, the key to acing this isn't just memorizing every single detail. It's about knowing what's most important and, crucially, how to apply it. Think of this as your high-yield study guide for Lecture 2. All killer, no filler. So, here's our game plan. First, we'll quickly hit the core differences between DNA and RNA. Then, we'll walk through the central dogma, focusing on all those key replication enzymes. After that, we'll touch on how gene expression is controlled, and then, this is the big one, we'll decode the experimental data you're going to see on the exam. We'll wrap it all up with some final pro tips. Sound good? Let's do it.
Okay, first things first, the absolute basics. You have got to be rock solid on what makes DNA and RNA different. I'm telling you, it's the foundation for literally everything else, especially when we get to replication.
So the most important difference, the one that causes a lot of the others, is on the sugar. Look at that 2' carbon. If you see a hydroxyl group, that OH, you're looking at ribose, which means it's RNA. If that oxygen is gone, it's been deoxygenated, it's deoxyribose, and that's DNA. This one little change makes a huge difference in stability. And of course, don't forget, thymine is for DNA, uracil is its buddy in RNA. All right, let's talk about melting temperature, or TM. This is a classic exam question. It's all about bond strength. Just remember this. GC pairs have 3 hydrogen bonds. AT pairs only have 2. It's that simple. So it's going to take more energy, right, more heat, to break 3 bonds than to break 2. That means if you have a DNA sequence that's packed with G's and C's, its melting temperature is going to be higher. For sure, expect a question where you have to compare 2 DNA strands and say which one has the higher TM.
Okay, on to section 2. We're diving into the process of DNA replication. This is where you'll get a ton of questions about which enzyme does what, so let's really dial in on the details here. You have to know the key players and their jobs. Helicase is like the zipper. It just unwinds the double helix. Primase is super important. It's an RNA polymerase, and its job is to put down a little RNA primer, because DNA polymerase is picky and can't start from scratch. Then, of course, DNA polymerase comes in and does all the hard work of building the new strand. And finally, you've got DNA ligase, which is basically the molecular glue that seals up the gaps on the lagging strand.
Ah, the lagging strand. This trips people up all the time, but it's actually pretty logical. Remember, DNA polymerase can only build in one direction, 5' to 3'. So one of the strands has to be built kind of backwards, in these little chunks called Okazaki fragments. Each one of those fragments needs its own RNA primer to get started. Then DNA pol extends it, an enzyme called RNase H comes in and chews up the old primer, and finally, DNA ligase seals the gap. It's like a stitch-and-go process, over and over again.
This slide really breaks down the difference for you. The leading strand? That's the easy one. It gets one primer, and then it just goes, continuously, following right behind helicase. But the lagging strand is basically working against traffic. It has to be done in pieces, it needs a bunch of primers, and it synthesizes away from the fork. Knowing these key differences is an easy way to snack some points on the final.
All right, section 3. Now the slide here says controlling gene expression, which is super important. But for our Lecture 2 review, let's reframe this a bit. Let's think about this in terms of the DNA's state during replication. It really all comes down to accessibility.
Just think about this open versus closed idea as a perfect analogy for replication. Most of the time, your DNA is super tightly packed up and closed. That's heterochromatin. But at the replication fork, helicase has literally pried the DNA open, making it accessible. So even though these specific terms, euchromatin and heterochromatin, are huge for transcription, the basic idea that DNA has to be physically open for any machinery to get in there and work is totally fundamental for replication too.
So how do we actually see this in a lab? Well, this is a DNA-Cy protection assay. DNA-Cy is an enzyme that just chews up DNA. So if the DNA is all exposed and open, like it would be at a replication fork, it's going to get degraded. Now look at the lane for tumor 1. See how the band for the BCL2 gene is just gone? That tells you the DNA in that region was open and accessible, so the DNA's got to it. The key takeaway is simple. No band means the DNA was open.
Okay, everybody, listen up. Pay close attention here. This section is all about how Professor Pasquinelli is going to test what you know about replication using real data. You are definitely going to be asked to interpret figures like these, so let's connect these experiments back to our Lecture 2 enzymes.
First up, the EMSA, also called a gel shift assay. I mean, the name pretty much tells you what it does. You're looking for a shift in a gel. So what question is this really answering when we think about replication?
Okay, the whole point of an EMSA is to see if a protein binds directly to a specific piece of DNA. Let's say you want to know if helicase binds to the origin of replication. You just mix them together in a test tube. If helicase grabs onto the DNA, that whole complex is now bigger and heavier, so it's going to move slower through the gel. That's your shifted band. So if you see a shift, the protein bound to the DNA. No shift, no binding. It's really that straightforward.
Next up, the CHIP assay. This is a big one. The huge difference between CHIP and EMSA is that CHIP tells you what's happening inside a living cell. It's not in a test tube. So with CHIP, you're asking a question like, is DNA polymerase actually sitting on the replication fork right now inside the cell? That's the power of CHIP.
Here's your simple checklist for reading a chip. First, look at the input lane. That's just your control. A band there just proves that the DNA you're looking for was actually in your sample to begin with. The most important lane is the IP lane, for immunoprecipitation. If you see a band in the IP lane, it means your antibody worked. It grabbed your protein, let's say DNA polymerase, and that protein was physically stuck to your DNA of interest. A band in the IP lane means binding happened inside the cell.
Okay, I know this one might seem like a bit of a stretch for a Lecture 2 review, but let's connect the dots. DNA replication is a key part of the cell cycle, right? A cell has to replicate its DNA before it can divide. Well, a microarray lets you see which genes are turned on or off. So, in cells that are getting ready to divide, like cells you've treated with serum to make them grow, what would you expect? You'd expect the genes for all the replication enzymes, like DNA polymerase and helicase, to be turned way up. They'd show up as bright red spots on the microarray.
Now, let's take it a step further. What can we infer from this? A red spot means there's more mRNA for that gene. So if you see that all the genes for the replication enzymes turn bright red at the same time under the same conditions, that's a massive clue. It tells you that they're all being regulated together as part of a coordinated program to get the cell ready to divide. It shows you how replication fits into the bigger picture of the cell's life.
We're in the home stretch now. This is the lightning round, just for Lecture 2. These are the specific, high-yield facts that love to pop up as tricky multiple-choice questions. Let's lock these in right now. Okay, here we go. Rapid fire. First, DNA polymerase always synthesizes in the 5' to 3' direction. That means it reads the template strand from 3' to 5'. Don't get that backwards. Second, primase is an RNA polymerase. That's why the primers it lays down are made of RNA and have to be removed later. Third, where does the energy to add a new nucleotide come from? It comes from breaking the high-energy phosphate bonds on the DNTP that's being added. And fourth, to be a functional chromosome, you need 3 things: a centromere, telomeres, and, the key part from Lecture 2, at least one origin of replication.
And that's a wrap on our focused review of Lecture 2. Seriously, you've been working hard all quarter. Trust what you know, read every question carefully, and just apply these core concepts we talked about. You're ready for this. Now go crush that final. Good luck.